So welcome everybody to Crisis and Business Continuity once again. And of course, last week we were looking at business continuity planning too. And one of the key insight from that particular lectures was for me to really highlight the key issues relating to crisis and business continuity, and of course emphasize when plans goes wrong, what can we do? What next should we do? And we try to emphasize on testing and of course the need for regular updates of crisis and business continuity plans as well. So that's the essential aspect that I emphasized in that last lecture. So today we'll be looking at crisis communications and handling the media. So in today's lecture, so I really want to explain the impact of crisis communications and try to look at some of the principal methods that are often frequently being used in crisis communications, and try to look at some of the appropriate communication methods. And of course, we try to understand the role of the media, and we see try to look at how to deal with media pressures, and of course try to understand some of the crisis communication strategies that are available within organization. So that being said, so I think obviously in the previous weeks we've been looking at crisis management, and one of the key things we've understood from the previous lectures was really to look at crisis as something that has a major uh, impact to affect an organization in terms of their business continuity or survival, and we know that crises are sudden. So and the type of crisis, different types of crisis will require different communication strategies. So that is something that is absolutely essential. That as a manager, as a business continuity executive in an organization, you need to be very clear in terms of what sort of crisis communication strategies you're going to employ, and how to go about what sort of measures. Because, say, for example, if you're dealing with earthquake, if you're dealing with flooding, if you're dealing with an industrial accident, the type of crisis communication strategies you deploy will differ from dealing with the pandemic, maybe, and all that. So that's something that organization managers needs to take into consideration. And one of the key aspects. So why is crisis communication? Why is it really important? We know based on empirical evidence that an issue ignored is a crisis ensured. So what that means is actually that you don't want to wait until a problem degenerates and become much more bigger than what an organization can handle. And it's really important that you start to look at the origin of the issues, and try to understand what could go wrong. And then you try to put up some preparatory measures in place to deal with that. And of course, raise your crisis communication teams and provide them with the relevant training that is needed ahead of time. So that is something that is fundamentally important to do before you get to a stage where there's a lot of pressures from the media, and people really want to know, stakeholder wants to know what you're doing to handling the situations relating to the crisis itself. So of course, I did mention one of the things I've mentioned now is the need for crisis communication team. So you need to make sure before a crisis happens, you have responsibility and interaction of your crisis team. Do a proper training and simulation exercise among the team, and of course, try to understand who's responsible for doing what within the organization. So these are really important aspects of of managing crisis, and also in the event of crisis, or as well of communicating when a crisis to happen. So that's the other point. So you want to make sure, say for example, from your business continuity, from your public relations, from your legal operation, of finance and human resource team, that everyone is on the same page when it comes to communicating to the media, who is disseminating information to the media. The other aspect is to look at carry out a stakeholder analysis and look at different stakeholders of the organizations, and try to map out what sort of crisis communication message you're going to disseminate in the event of certain type of crisis. And of course, this needs to be rehearsed ahead of time before a crisis to happen. You need to understand who are your stakeholders. I was explaining stakeholders as those who are people or parties that are likely to be affected by the activities of the organization. It could be investors, customers, regulators, local communities, the medias, and all that. So a wide range of people have different interests in an organization, and they will be asking different set of questions. So it is important to know them and rehearse and know what sort of message that you will be passing across to these stakeholders. The other point I want to mention is to understand what problem does this crisis actually cause for these different type of stakeholders. As I mentioned, they will have different requirements as well. So that's really important. And of course, you need to understand the type of messaging that we want to deliver to each of these stakeholders as well, and whose responsibility it is to communicate to them. So that is absolutely important. And of course, you want to ensure that you have consistency across different groups as well. So that being said, the other point I want to mention is around scope, objective, and medium as well. So you want to have your crisis communication scope to be clearly defined. So is it a national problem? Is it a local problem? Is it an international problem? So you need to have the scope uh, clearly defined, and that's something that is absolutely fundamental to look at. And of course, the objectives as well. You need to make sure that you're very clear in terms of what you want to do, the level of urgency, the warning explanations and informations in terms of apology, what exactly you're going to do, and of course the audience as well. So you want to make sure that obviously you have your message disseminated using appropriate channel. And what are those methods that are available to disseminate your crisis communication method? We now live in an age where information is disseminated instantaneously, because you can look at social media, age of social media now. So you can look at maybe radio, TV, website, your own website, newspapers. You can look at your social media. You can look at emails and telephone and all that. Depends on the type of stakeholders you're trying to speak to. That will depend on what sort of mode of communications you're going to obviously use. But I think it's really important to know that you want to aim to be the first source of information. If it's a crisis that's affecting your organizations, try to be the first source of information. These are key takeaway from me. Try to be the first source of information, and the most reliable source of information as well. And of course, that's number two. You want to make sure you're most reliable, and try also to maintain credibility throughout the whole crisis process, and be clear what exactly you want to do. So again, try to also be consistent, and try to speak with one voice, not like a different voice coming out from different part of the organization. So that's absolutely essential. The final part as well, you can look at communication through your own website. You can disseminate that. I think a popular Virgin Media is a good example in this area, using your own website in the event of a disaster or crisis, and dedicate a particular sections in your website to. And many organizations do this as well. It's a best practice, and make sure that you continue to update people, continue to update stakeholders through that particular mediums as well, and provide additional information and all that will be credible, and people know that you're on top of the game, and you are actually doing absolutely what you can to pull the situation under control. Now, we need to look at media influence. So, media is obviously will put a lot of pressures. We exert a lot of pressures on organization in the event of crisis, because they have a story to tell, they have a story to write. So, it is really important to make sure that you're providing an up to date information when it is required. And of course, we're going to look at some strategies that organizations can use, especially from a institutional crisis communication point of view. We're going to look at those strategies in a moment. So when you're dealing with media, so one of the things that you want to try to look at, there are some negative principles that you want to never lie. So tell the truth and tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth in the event of a crisis. Never lie. And because that can also escalate the crisis, it can create more problem for the organizations. And never speculate. That's the second point. Never lie, never speculate. And the third point is to say, never say no comment. Okay, these are within the literatures around crisis management and crisis communication literatures. These are not an effective way of managing crisis, or an effective way of communicating your message to the media, or you're trying to mislead the public. So these 3 points: never lie, try to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in the event of a crisis, and never speculate. If you don't know, it is okay to say you don't have the information now. You will go back and check, and of course that is more perfectly acceptable than to formulate and speculate on a point that you're not sure about. So that those are the 2 points, and the final one is never say no comment. And of course, a classic example, we saw the deep water right and the BP disasters in 2010. For doing this for live, we'll play the video for you to look at. But this is an event that is widely covered in the medias and in the literatures as well. So you need to take into consideration some cases of crisis and look at, and also learn some lessons from what went wrong in terms of the communication aspect. So that's why I'm making reference to BP in this particular slide. So we know that with the BP, so explosions occur to 20th of April in 2010, and of course, where by the 3rd of May, BP were saying where it wasn't an accident, but we are absolutely responsible for the oil, for cleaning it up, and that we intend to do so. So they did mention that, and they were trying to shift the blame um, to a third party, which is the Transocean drilling rig. So they're trying to shift that particular blame to them. So by the 14th of May, so we know that it's become a big problem. So in the case of the BP, I was explaining that explosions happened 20th of April 2010, and initially by the 3rd of April. So what happened is BP was trying to shift responsibilities, and of course by the 18th of April the message have changed. So I think it's really important for managers and leaders to appropriately plan for crisis, and know what sort of message to pass across to the public. And by the 18th of April, it was a question of, oh, I think the environmental impact of this particular disaster is likely to be very, very modest. This is what happened by the 18th of April, but with more questioning by the 30th of April, the CEO at the time, Mr. Haywood, says, "Oh, I want my life back." So this is what crisis can do to a leader in an organization. And of course, there are different media pressures and a lot of regulators, and also local communities as well, activists as well, because of the pollutions from the oil, that really wants to have a very clear idea in terms of what is going on in that particular area. So I believe with the BP, so I think it is fundamentally essential for organizations to realize what to do part time. So that is the key thing. Now you want to look at the impact of the media. You want to look at the impact of the media or in the event of a crisis. So, like I said, media have stories to tell, and of course they want to know. They want to be able to write about the crisis. They want to be able to write about the impact it's having on organizations. So, managers and leaders within organizations, everyone needs to be very prepared, and that's why having a crisis communication team before a crisis happens, it is fundamentally essential for managers and organizations to keep in mind. So I think that's one of the things. And of course, BP actually spent, or initially 50 million was spent by BP on campaign, and of course they tried to allocate dividend, which you have gone towards cleanup. But by the time these events start to unfold, we see what the spokesperson look at what is unfolding, spending a few hours with families, with weekend and all that, but with more questioning from the media, and it becomes really a serious issue that even they had to look at it, invite them to the Congress, to the U.S. Congress for questioning, and of course, crisis is not that. That's the sort of pressures that organization leaders and managers and organizations can face when there's a crisis. Investors want to know that the money you save, looking committee want to know that you protect their interests, that the environment is not polluted, that is from activists, regulators want to find you. You've got to, and reputations of the organizations may be badly damaged as well, because if organization is caught lying, that could have a serious impact on the organization. So how do you deal with the media? So we've looked at the negative rules where we say don't tell lies, okay, tell the truth, tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And of course, also don't say, never say no comment, right? We look at that. We look at about 3 points when we look at that. So some of the positive rule for me is that you want to name a very high ranking spokesperson of the organization to deal with to be the forefront person, and of course be the first to supply information as well. So this is number two. So in terms of positive rules, nominate a high ranking person within the organization, number one. Number two, supply information, be the first person to supply information. And of course, try to number three, this is about giving full and accurate information on a regular basis to the stakeholders and to the media as well. And of course, I did mention the importance of having something on your dedicated section on your website to deal with the incidents as well, and provide as much information as you can on that website as well. And where maybe identify press centers as well to pin down maybe media demand as well. This is really important as well. In a number of literatures that point to the value of this and what it actually help organization to handle and to deal with, and take account of media deadlines as well. And of course, I think the other point I also want to mention is to use communication materials prepared in advance. So try to prepare some of these communications materials in advance before a crisis happens. And that's why last week we were talking about the values of exercise and testing and regularly updating your plans as well. So some of these needs can be preempted and of course pre-tested as well. And to look at that, it may be simulated. It doesn't cost too much. Crisis experts in and academics, for example, like us, we help organizations as well to design exercise related to crisis management and stress testing and of course looking at their crisis communications as well in terms of strategy. So there are other crisis communications guidelines that are available in the literature. I encourage you to go back and look at those. But one of the things I want to mention in terms of when you start to look at some of the crisis communications guidelines that are there is the need to constantly uh, informing the public about what is going on, what is unfolding, and provide accurate information as well. So if it is not, don't allow room for vacuum in terms of information. So always try to provide regular information. And silence in the midst of crisis actually implies good, especially if we are dealing with organizational crisis. Some literatures have argued that, but it's not just enough to assume that everything is going to be okay. There's no reason to be alarmed, but you need to make sure that you're credible and that you provide details of how you're getting your conclusions as well. So it is vital to realize that actually maybe you're facing reporters, they have deadlines, and of course provide them with accurate information. That is absolutely essential as well. So I believe that I've been able to throw some light on this spot. But of course, I think one of the things that I want to mention as well as I try to wrap it up, there are classical examples or some of the most cited successful crisis communication effort is the Johnson and Johnson, the Italian capsules crisis that happened back in 1982 and 1986 is widely cited within the crisis management literature. I will encourage you to go and pick up that particular case today and see what Johnson and Johnson actually how they reacted. Well, I'll tell you more stories about these and especially what they did and navigating throughout the whole crisis testing process. But we can draw some lessons from the Johnson and Johnson case. One of the things that you see is situations where there is an internal video network of for all 165 companies and divisions. There are still hours videotapes covering all aspects of the crisis viewed by all employees. And of course, the chairman and the president co-signed letters sent to all employees explaining the crisis and what the organization was doing at the time. and of course the step it will take as well to deal with the incidents as well. So these are really some of the things that were coming through. And employee response were very impressive as well. So these is to employees, for example, in the Johnson and Johnson case. So finally, for me, I think I just need to there are a range of strategies that are available to organizations that organizations can use in advance of crisis. Some raises a lot of ethical questions as well, but there are questions that around which crisis communication strategies are more effective in the event of a crisis. Which of these strategies are really effective for organizations? So, say for example, simple denial. Do we deny or we did not do it? For example, from a crisis situational crisis communication point of view, so do we deny that in this particular instance our organization is not responsible? So simple denial is one of the strategies that is available for organizations to look at, and some organizations do these quite frequently. Sometimes shifting blame. So we saw it in the case of BP 2010 oil disaster that I was explaining started earlier. And this is more like trying to shift the blame to say someone else do this. And sometimes as well, depending on the nature of the crisis organization, they claim provocation. And of course, we also know that sometimes it could be issues of defensibility, and of course, sometimes it could be a case of another strategy, which is accident, or it is accidental. So the incident is a sort of accident. So again, trying to minimize it. So good intentions as well is another strategy. To say that the error was a result of good intentions. Sometimes organizations use that strategies. And we also know that organizations also use minimization strategies as well. Organizations use minimization strategies to try to minimize the impact. So the problem is not as bad as you assume it. And organizations also use differentiation as well, trying to place the incident in a slightly different context. And of course, we know that sometimes organizations attack the accusers as well and the events too. So these are some strategies, and of course, compensation as well is also there in the events of crisis, and of course, corrective action, notification. So in which case, the organization is admitting responsibility and seeking for forgiveness. So these are some of the strategies that are there in terms of crisis communication strategies. But it's there for you as a manager. I think one of the things that we can do, you can look at the case studies and look at which one of these strategies is actually most effective for organizations that were involved in that particular crisis. So this is crisis communication for me today. I believe that I've been able to kind of expose you to crisis communications, and of course how to handle the media. And then of course one of the things that I want to also look at in the next lectures will revolve around crisis prepared organization, also and crisis prepared organization or crisis prone organizations.